All right, everybody. Welcome back to the this week's live stream edition on it's another Ask Me Anything event. And so that just means that you can type in your questions down below, and I'll show your comments here on the screen. You can kind of see it over here, I guess. And that'll give you an idea anyway of what question I'm trying to answer. And so feel free just to type those in. They're either located on the left of your screen or the right of your screen as you look at, and depending on whether you're looking at it on a phone or on a laptop or something like that. There's just a number of things I wanted to make sure I go over before we get started with tonight's live stream. And I believe that kind of my header for this particular live stream was about how Washington State Democrats end 132 years of free speech on the floor. And that the reason why I led with that is it basically outlines, I think Center Square has an article up on it. Haywire has that listed as their top featured story for the day. And that is basically the decision last Friday, of the state Democrats to instead of having a supermajority in order to stop debate during the legislative session by elected officials who are on the floor and basically discussing amendments or the bill, right? They basically want to cut it down. They only had a few minutes to speak. Each representative was only allowed to speak for a little bit of time. They've had this rule on the floor that it would take a supermajority to prevent the other people from being able to speak to the bill. Elected officials, remember, we only have 49 districts in our state. That means you have 98 representatives and 49 senators. There's only so many of them up there. They're not all going to talk in every bill, of course, but many of them want to provide comment on that bill for the coverage in the media and also for their constituents back home. And the Democrats have decided that that is too much democracy for anybody in the legislature, and so they want to cut it off. And it's an unusual move on their part, particularly since this rule was put in 132 years ago and it hasn't been changed. It didn't matter whether it was the legislature was run by Democrats or Republicans, so it's kind of a big deal. Remember, this isn't a filibuster rule. We don't have the filibuster in Washington State. But the minority party does have the ability to, each elected official has the ability to make comments on bills, and that's what Democrats don't want anymore. So it's pretty nasty as a tactic to go down that road, and to some extent, some people are wondering when you look at the legislature whether this is Speaker Jenkins basically flexing a little bit and dealing with pushback from Representative Monica Stonier from Vancouver, who I think is probably trying to muscle in there and boot Jenkins out as Speaker. And so there's a lot of infighting going on the Democrat side behind the scenes. At the same time, you saw the Democrats also no longer are allowing easy access for the governor's staff to the caucus room, which is kind of amazing because generally over the last probably 12 to 20 years or so, maybe longer, but at least in that window of time, the governor's been a Democrat, of course, and their staff have usually had some level of access to the caucus room so they could understand and be able to respond to concerns that the Democrat Party might be raising about issues regarding legislation. And so there's this weird kind of insular mode that seems to be going on in Olympia with the Washington State Legislature, particularly with the Democrats, since they have a sizable majority in both houses, and they are definitely chomping at the bit to hurt as many people in Washington State as possible, apparently. So one other thing I wanted to start out with, because I do oftentimes get these questions, where are you speaking next? And I do try to kind of give a heads up on some of that. And I've got a little list here of a couple places that I'm going to be speaking at. So if you happen to be in those areas, you can come and see me live. The only thing better, I always prefer to do live presentations anyway. I'm actually a little bit more comfortable in that environment. I love taking questions from audiences. I like the interaction a little bit better. It's a lot better than speaking to a camera, which is a little bit hard for me to see what you're doing. The advantage, of course, of the live stream is at least I get to see you enter your questions here. So I get a chance to see what you are actually asking me to do. So there's at least some level of interaction. But I still like live events the best. And my next one is going to be, I believe it's around noon. I'm going to be at the Chelan Douglas Women's Republican Club meeting February 3rd. So February 3rd, which is next Monday, I believe. So it's this next coming up Monday. Then I will be at the Chelan Douglas Women's Republican Club doing a presentation there. The next day, I will be at the Skagit Women's Republican Club out in Mount Vernon. So February 4th. So that's Monday and Tuesday of next week. 2 basic lunch presentations, a little ways apart, a little bit of travel over the pass in order to get between the 2 of them. If you, and that means that basically next week's live stream, instead of being on a Tuesday, is probably going to be on Wednesday of next week. I'll try to have it still at 5:30, but at least because it's with that event that I have going on up in Skagit and some other activist training that I'm planning to do afterwards, I believe that it'll be just a little too tough for me to get down and do the live stream that evening. So I'm going to be doing that live stream on Wednesday evening instead. March 8th, I'm planning to do the Okanagan Lincoln Day dinner. It looks like I'm pretty sure that means I'm going to be speaking there as the primary speaker. I don't think I'm emceeing that. I'm also speaking at the March 29th Clark County Lincoln Day dinner, which is going to be in Vancouver down the waterfront, same place it was last year if you happen to have been there. I'll also be at the April 12th Kitsap Lincoln Day dinner, which I've been to a number of times over the last few years. So I'll be presenting there as well. And also May 3rd at the Skagit County Lincoln Day dinner, which is usually held up at the airport hangar there, the Skagit Regional Airport. I will be there again as well speaking. So I'm just excited to see so many people around the state. Now, this doesn't include training programs or training sessions that are currently being discussed and kind of organized in various places around the state. I believe I'm going to be doing something out in Spokane, even though we haven't worked out all the details yet. Probably something around Island, maybe San Juan County, Whatcom County area, and probably down in Clark County as well. So I know I'll be bouncing around the state quite a bit over the next few months. The training programs that I'm usually doing now, the stuff that people are usually requesting me to help them with, are presentations about how to investigate corruption in local government, how to set up local teams of people using Public Records Act or even PDC complaints, how to teach people how to file PDC complaints. When I do PDC training, I actually file live PDC complaints while we're there. So just so you can kind of see what it looks like and what the process is, and then how I found the violations that I filed the complaint on. That reminds me, I need to file a bunch more that are kind of piling up in my to-do list here. But also, I'll do some training for candidates who are planning to run for office. Not candidates if you plan to run for Congress. If you plan to run for Congress and you need my class, please don't run. That means that you have no idea what you're doing. This is really more of a training class for people who want to run for local government. So school board, city council, county commission, or even in the legislature. And I do try to customize these types of training. I've done a lot of these in the past when I worked at the Freedom Foundation. And just being at Roanoke this weekend, there was a lot of requests for more people to do stuff like that. So I know League of Their Own is kind of doing this for female candidates, but they kind of have a niche focus on that. And I would like to be able to support any candidates, I don't care whether you're female or not, but just to help you kind of hit the ground running and make that a little bit easier process for you. Avoiding the most obvious and classic mistakes that you will absolutely probably make without a little bit of just direction ahead of time, and just some basic things on how to set up your campaign, how to run it efficiently, how to do basic outreach, how to just set yourself up for a much more successful campaign. So pretty basic stuff actually, and but I find it to be worthwhile. I haven't done too many of those recently. I started doing them years ago when I was working at the Freedom Foundation, and I really felt like there was a big return on the time put into that. I felt it was pretty beneficial, so I enjoyed doing those, and I'll be doing some more. So for those of you who were at Roanoke, thank you so much for coming up to me and talking to me. There were 600 some odd people there. There were just a lot of people at Roanoke. It's always good. I get a chance to see a lot of people, and if I didn't get a chance to spend some time talking to you, I really apologize. usually go out of my way, and I am on the board there. So I love this conference. I've been going to it since 2011, and I really do think it's an important conference for networking, particularly. There's panel presentations, there's speakers, there's debates, but really the networking and the ability to get together with a lot of other like-minded people and compare and contrast, and organize future events and campaigns and discuss policy issues or bills or whatever, and meeting a lot of elected officials. That really makes Roanoke a much more interesting event to me. There's nothing like it in the state of Washington, so it's kind of a really good opportunity to get a chance to cover just a lot of topics. And if you stayed through till Sunday, you know about the major power outage that happened on Sunday, and we had to do our last panel presentation with no power in the room, and they had to open up the windows in the back so you could actually get a little bit of natural light in there. And I just like the adaptability. I know there were quite a few people that stayed for that last debate, or it really wasn't a debate, it was a panel presentation, but a lot of you stayed there. And I know I stayed to the bitter end because I had the farm truck and I had to haul stuff home, and I usually just like to make sure that if there's any last minute things that we have to pick up at the conference, that I get there. A big thanks goes out to the women's Republican clubs around Washington State who provide all the centerpieces that they donated to the conference, and they did a great job setting them out. That was kind of one of my tasks as a board member, just that there's each of us kind of get assigned a few things on the board. And that was something I've been doing for a long time, and the Women's Republican Club just made it so easy. A whole bunch of them all around the state. The North Shore Club out of Ocean Shores, Kitsap, Lewis County, Pierce County, just a lot of the different clubs were there. You did a great job. It looked great, so that was really fun. And I hope that if you were there, you really enjoyed that you enjoyed the opportunity to network with other people, and I hope you came up and said hi. So I imagine there'll probably be some comments in there on this. So let's get to this. Looks like there's a ton of comments that started popping up right while we were getting going here. So I will try to do a better job jumping on these. Just so you know, real quick. Normally, there would be like an image up here that would tell you this is a live stream. I just had a little bit of problem with that, getting that set up here today. So it isn't working during the show today, but the comments are, so let's just jump right into them and see where we go. First question that came up, and by the way, if you say @We the Governed, it kind of makes your question pop a little bit easier for me not to miss it as I kind of roll down through this. This question is from TBMC Rhino Hunter. In your opinion, do you think Jim Walsh will retain the state party chair? And for those of you who aren't paying attention to internal partisan political processes, this weekend coming up down in Vancouver is the Washington State Republican Party reorg meeting, and just basically my assessment is probably Jim Walsh does retain that job. I have to tell you, being party chair, this is just a real frank conversation from me, and give you an explanation for where I'm coming from. Every time the party chair is vacant, I've had people come up and ask me to run for the chair. Going back to 2012, I think was the first time I had somebody come up and ask me about that. And I've been asked to run for the Thurston County party chair every year since 2011 at least, or every time there's a cycle. And my answer then has been no, and it will be no in the future. That's not really a good position for me. I don't think I do a good job there. But I have to tell you also, there's this element of difficulty when you're in that position and being able to be an effective activist, in my opinion. And I am an activist. I am a crusader. I care about liberty and freedom. I want to try to put as much time as I can have left on this planet anyway to try to advance the cause of liberty and freedom, particularly in a difficult state, behind enemy lines, behind the blue curtain in states like Washington, where I live. And I love the state. So I want to be able to make an impact there. And I don't think I would be a very good chair. And so there's certain people that probably are better in those positions than I am. Jim Walsh is way better than I would be as party chair. He also has a little bit different patience in being able to get in there and deal with the factions. Just remember, no matter who's chair, and it doesn't matter who it is, and it doesn't matter who it's been, and it doesn't matter who it'll be in the future, no matter who that chair is, they will always be blamed for everything. And whether it's within their sphere of control or not, they will always be blamed. And they will be expected to do things that no party's ever done. They'll be expected to do things that people think parties do, but they're really not good at. They'll be expected to do things they don't have enough money to do anyway. And at the same time, the party usually does get credit when Republicans have success, whether the party had anything to do with it or not. So that's a bonus. But the reality is that that's a difficult position. There's a lot of aspects of being involved in the party side of the political process that just require, and it's just kind of the nature of what you're doing. There's a certain hamster wheel structure to it that you just have to be. Your meetings, you have minimum meetings, platforms, Robert Rules of Order discussions over a lot of these different things, and you basically have to do all that stuff. And then anything else, which is really, it's the other things that people really expect you to do, you don't have as much time to do that as you think you do going into it. I have only talked to a couple hundred people who successfully have challenged their county party or even state party, but they jump in to get into those positions, and then they discover the same truth that's out there. It's better if you approach it with a fairly realistic path that you're holding down the fort, advancing things better. You want to be very open. There's some basic things you need to do well, especially when you're picking people to replace somebody who's partisan on your side of the spectrum who resigns, and you need to fill that role or fill that position with 3 options. That's actually a pretty key role that every party has, and they'll have to do. But there's a lot of things that tend to be done more effectively outside the party that people oftentimes think the party does. And essentially the party just takes all the arrows. There are some advantages, of course, to running an efficient and well-run party. You'll do a better job of fundraising typically. You'll do a better job fighting back. You have some legal opportunities and authority to fight back on some things, like a couple of the lawsuits that the Washington State Republican Party have been involved in regarding shady practices in elections. That's litigation that almost nobody else could actually pursue. They also have some legal advantages when it comes to campaign finance contributions and aggregations and the limits that are placed on the party compared to PACs or individuals. So there definitely is some pretty good stuff that you can do there at the party, but it's not the I don't know, the golden ring I think that a lot of people want. And I'm impressed that Jim Walsh has been wanting to do this, is willing to step in and do it, because he was on the board before he was in the state legislature, so he kind of knows the drill on what he was getting into. So he is running again. I'd say odds are probably in his favor to prevail. Shatona Thomas, hey Glenn, longtime follower here. What can we do about this crap? Well, I'm not sure what crap you're talking about, but I'm assuming if you're referring to crap, you're probably talking about the Washington State Legislature, which is pretty full of it right now, but particularly from the Democrat side, because they've thrown everything in the kitchen sink like a pile of spaghetti at the wall, and they want to run on the virtue signaling dumb ideas that many of which I don't think are going to go anywhere, but nevertheless, they've been proposed. It seems probably more of an overreaction to Trump's victory in D.C. more than anything else. I seriously doubt most of the legislators, particularly on the Democrat side, have even read the bills that they've proposed. Because remember, most of these bills end up being written by other people, and the legislator or senator exists as a conduit for that bill to nonpartisan staff, so they can create the bill, and then you get the blue slip on it, and you run around to get it signed to see how many other endorsements you get. But essentially, the bill's not really written by most of these legislators. And if you're familiar, we really have some exceptionally low-quality legislators in Olympia right now today, particularly on the Democrat side, some real crazy people, some of them, but they're also really not that literate, so they really wouldn't be capable of writing this stuff. If you've ever met them, you would know they couldn't do it. So they just simply pass on whatever left-wing kind of drama project landed on their laps. And I think there's still a bit of just frustration over losing at the federal level, and knowing that there's a trend going on that's not going to help them long term. So they're trying to throw things like rent control and more particularly absurd Second Amendment restrictions and First Amendment restrictions and tax ideas, and trying to overrule the Parents Initiative and making it easier for felons to get out of jail early if they use a gun in a violent crime. You know, they care. The stupidity of some of this stuff is awesome. I mean, it's so ridiculous, but nevertheless, less. That's what's going on out there. So I'm assuming that's the crap. And as I did a video a little while ago, I'm encouraging as many people as possible to use that, go in and make comments, and still put your name and sign in to oppose to the bad ideas. The handful of good ideas, the Republicans have generally, not completely, but have generally proposed some pretty good ideas. A lot of it's small ball right now because knowing they're in the minority, and the Democrats in particular are into this virtue signaling drama situation, the Republicans are kind of consigned to this wilderness of minimal value when it comes to what they can do. The most important thing they can do is vote no on a lot of stupid stuff that's going to come up through their committee and or hit the floor. But I don't know how much of it's really going to come through that way. Here's a question from DJ Moro de Rey. Will you oppose House Bill 1504? I don't remember. I mean, you'll have to tell me more about which bill that is. I think that's the bill, unless I'm confusing my numbers here, that says that that you have to get out insurance in order to own a firearm or ammunition or something like that. I think that's the one you're talking about. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments down here and I'll address that one. But yeah, that's a stupid bill. It's a horrible bill. It's a dumb idea. It's probably unconstitutional. I'm almost certain of that. But again, each time they pass an unconstitutional bill, whether it's rent control or a dumb tax increase or whatever it is, it's a hassle to get rid of it, right? It's litigation, it's drama, it's the abusiveness of implementing policies. And I do have to say that people have to be more engaged in getting better people to run for office earlier with some kind of a plan so we can get more people in there to stop some of this stuff. But correct me if I'm wrong on that, Bill. I'm not looking stuff up. You can see me on the screen. I'm not spending the time to go in and look at exactly which bill we're talking about each time. But any of these stupid Second Amendment bills in particular, I oppose all of them. The only, and some of them are just exceptionally absurd. There was a bill, I'm not sure if it's actually been officially proposed yet or not, that would reward people who turn in violent felons who have firearms. And even though nominally that might be considered a Second Amendment bill, I really consider that more of a crime bill, similar to the model that was used in Florida recently for the last few years. It seems to have been successful, and it seems to be a practical approach to getting firearms out of the hands of violent felons, which apparently only Republicans care about because Democrats seem to want felons to have firearms. But so that's a bill that I think is something I would support. Let's see. And Jason, sorry, I didn't get to this question here. Jason Fisher. Hey, Glenn, hope you are doing well. Do you think Colorado bills to ban semi-auto firearms, detachable mags, will pass, and will we see this in Washington and other states? Well, there's always a state that has to be first to get first place in craziness. Colorado is feeling left out, so they want to compete with California or Oregon. Obviously, California deciding to burn up a bunch of their cities is probably not a way to drive interest in whatever virtue signaling drama that they had down there. So it looks to me like in California, they've kind of been subdued this particular cycle in what they do in their legislature, plus the fact that the Trump administration holding back funds to states like Washington, Oregon, and California, which I think is a good idea. And it would be better if they just held back funds for years. But the threatening that in exchange for common sense and normal behavior, which our elected officials in these states typically haven't had, is probably going to change change things a little bit moving forward. But we've really only had a week. Stunning to think about this, but it's only been a week of the Trump administration, and they seem like Lenin, I think, once said there are weeks that decades happen, and decades where nothing happens. So in some cases, I feel like we're going through one of those concentrated periods of history where a lot is happening all at once, and so I'm not really totally sure how to evaluate the impact of what the Trump administration is doing, because it's one thing to say you're going to do something, it's another to quite see how it gets implemented when it hits the field. And it's actually not been enough time for us to see the practical impact in our state of the policies they propose. I'm on the record to have been for a while on some federal election reform policies that I think would make a really positive impact in Washington state, and I'd like to see them do those because those policies affect everything. and I do mean everything, every single thing that any of us talk about in this chat or any other videos I've done, those policies are actually a big deal. And if we can get the federal election reform done and the impact, I think, the positively that would have in our state, it clearly has an impact that affects lots of other things here. Let's see. Shatona Thomas, I think all Republicans should do a walkout on every bill that comes, but that's just me, and that's not a question. So I can't answer anything there. Walkouts, it's political theater, and I'm all about political theater when it makes sense. And sometimes it can, but it hasn't always worked when I've seen walkouts happen. And a lot of the states where you've seen this, it had more to do with the rules in place regarding quorum requirements before legislation could pass. But the Democrats have actually violated quorum situations in the past. I've seen it happen. So I'm not totally sure that would apply the same way here, especially at the numbers the Republicans have. But we will see. Zaire, yep, thank you. Always good to get the promotion. Hit the like, the least I can do to support Glenn's fantastic work. I always appreciate that. Again, that doesn't, it's not a question either, so nothing I can answer about that. But in self-promotion world, I'm going to kind of throw that up there. Let's see. Shatona Thomas, yep, I have a feeling that if we made voting with ID and no mail-in voting, Washington would have turned purple. Probably true. Mostly because you'd have a lot of non-existent people that would disappear off the voter rolls. And I think that based on what I've seen with the Washington Voter Research Project and just basic data analysis that is continuously ignored and suppressed by whatever's left of the legacy media and the state auditor's office and stuff they don't really want to look at. But I do think that would change things, especially if you had, it's not just voting with ID, but it's regular voter registration renewal. So you basically get rid of this crufty leftover fake addresses that just get left as artifacts, assuming they were real in the first place. And it restricts the ability of just people registering a lot of fake people that don't exist or non-U.S. citizens or other things that always happen in Washington State and Oregon and California and Arizona and frankly in Texas and in Colorado. We're seeing this happen in a lot of states. It's not just blue states that are doing it. Many soon-to-be former Republican states are doing it too. So that's one of the things that I think is, is kind of ridiculous. But I do think if they made those reforms, that would make quite a change. John Connolly, I don't know if that's a question that you're trying to say here, progressives versus far leftists, but I don't know that there's that much of a difference. It's very difficult to distinguish the flavors of abuse that the big government folk want to push on you. You might define that like far leftists would be actually the violent Antifa people that come out in the street and slash tires and attack people. And those are kind of like the shock troops for the left at this point in time. Maybe you call them far left, and progressive is just the mealy-mouthed person up at Evergreen State College that just wants to put on a show but doesn't really go do anything about it. But that's just me. I don't know how you'd necessarily define that all the time. They are trying, I'm assuming DJ Morata Ray, they are trying to raise property taxes in Washington 3 to 6%. Some of them are. Most of that is actually, there's still at this point in time the 1% restriction, which they are trying to lift this cycle. What that means is every year you can only lift it. You can't raise taxes more than 1%. The counties have interpreted that, though, and jurisdictions, including cities, have interpreted that restraint, and when they don't raise taxes at all in a given year or two or three, they call that banking. That is a potential raise that they can give you in the future, so that's when you get the shock. But again, our budget has gone up substantially in this state, massively over the last 10, 15 years, and the quality of government services that are delivered to you have gone down proportionally. In fact, that's usually the way big government works. The more money you put in, the lower quality you get out. Education's a good example. We spend more now than ever before, and no sane person really believes kids graduating from school today know more than they did 20 years ago. They don't. They probably know a lot less. And at least according to test scores, they certainly know less math. The only part of the English language that they learn more of now is your pronoun selection, and most of that's fake anyway. So that's kind of what I see going on right out there right now. Let's get some questions. Shatona Thomas, Glenn, what can we do to stop this insanity? Because at this point, I think Washington is too far gone to save, especially now that our voices are silenced by the opposition. Well, I mean, listen, it's funny because when I was younger and an activist, I remember thinking that Washington State was too far gone, America was too far gone, several different times in my life, actually, as an activist. And you find yourself surprised when things turn around a lot more than you realize. In 1994, I remember witnessing that. In 2016, I remember witnessing it. In 2010, I keep seeing times when people say this kind of stuff. They say just this, and they think everything's too gone. And I think one of the perspectives that you have, and part of it's just a lack of education when it comes to history, we don't really tend to do a good job looking at history from the perspective of the cyclical nature of political movements, which do happen. Now, listen, it sucks if you're living in a place that's like Washington, where the Democrats want to abuse you and do bad things, but there tends to be pushback the other way. There always is. There always has been. It's only been true for all of human history. Now, it's not impossible that you can crater a place so bad that whenever it does turn around, it's quite a while down the road. But I do think you're going to see cycles that are coming around. I do believe my federal election reform policy requests that I'm trying to work with anybody who's remotely sane back in Congress or in the Trump administration. It's one of those policies that they really do need to push through, but it needs to come through at through Congress and the Senate. It just has to. And it's not that easy. The obstacles and the stumbling blocks tend to be Republicans in red states because they're lazy and they're asleep at the switch, and they have no idea what it's like to fight the left, and they don't realize the same corruption and problems that we find in our voting system in Washington are probably being pushed in their voting system there too, and they're not even aware of it because, like everything, it just advances in these slow steps. What's unbelievable, though, is the big changes that appear to be going on right now in D.C., genuine, significant changes, and the momentum shift. You can see some of this in just surveys, and it's not coming from places that people think. Even if you look at the Trump election results, where did he have this biggest shift? He didn't have the biggest shift in rural conservative areas. He actually had his biggest shift from the popular vote in blue cities that he lost in many cases, but the gap narrowed tremendously. And what that's telling me is that there is a much different constituency starting to come around. Limited government, and you can call it populism if you want, but largely this is a push towards limiting the abuse of government one way or the other. And Democrats seem clueless about it, which is probably a blessing. But frankly, half the Republican Party is clueless about it too, and so they're not really functioning in a productive way to actually take advantage of it in most cases, especially from red states. I just find a shocking level of naive approach from people who don't have to fight the left on a regular basis. They just have no idea how solidly corrupt they are. One of the reasons why some of the activists, I think, in Florida ended up being really effective down the road was that they were a purple state, even a blue state, not that long ago. So when you see a state go through the shift that they did in Florida, then they come out of it a much stronger state. If Pennsylvania keeps moving in that direction, I think you'll see the same thing there. And you'll see it in some of these other states that are swing today, and in 10 years, you're going to be looking at them as though they're a Republican state, and they've always been that way when they weren't. So there's a real interesting contrast there. John Connolly, Glenn, are you going to be at the protests in Olympia on Thursday regarding H.R. 4607? I don't have all the bills memorized by number, so you'll have to explain which one that is and which protest, because I think there's more than one going on that day. The one I saw, I was reading about a protest that was going on, and I thought it was not the bill as much as it was the restriction on the 132-year-old rule that just got thrown out by the Democrats that would allow our legislators to actually have a voice on the floor. So that's the protest that I am interested in on Thursday. I think that was being motivated by Republicans coming down, and I'm not sure what 4607 is. I probably do know what it is, but I don't know it by the number. So let me know what bill you're talking about. Hey, there's support here from Grays Harbor, from Matthew. Thank you. I'm sure there is. Love Grays Harbor, and I was out there just this weekend. Although the power outage in Ocean Shores was annoying. I don't think it was a conspiracy, but have the whole Ocean Shores lose power like that for as long as they did while I was there, it was pretty bad. They still had the power out, and it was it looked like it was a big transformer that had gone out. That was kind of significant. John Connolly, I know you're responding to Shatona there, and some of these, I don't get into these all the time, but I agree with you about showing up is a big part of it, right? Okay, now I'm seeing all these other questions down here. Oh, man. Okay, I got to get into the questions, guys. Let's get going here. Let's see. Let's jump down to Jack Paudler. This is a question. Odds on the terrible anti-gun laws getting put into force. I don't know, and I'm questioning some of them already, whether they're even going to get out of the legislature. Some of them probably won't. There are a couple that I just want to see how much further they get. Listen, I oppose them all, but the stupid bill that says felons shouldn't get extra time served if they use a gun in the commission of a crime, which I want to say, who was it? Goodman? Roger Goodman, I think, was pushing that one, which is insane. I'd worked with him once years ago on a electronic home monitoring reform bill. He was good. I mean, I had a pretty good relationship back then, and I was at the Freedom Foundation, so now it's been 10 years. But we worked on a bill at the time that I was just a volunteer, grassroots activist on it that had come out of whistleblowers that had come to me about just some of the corruption in the electronic home monitoring system. And so I had a pretty positive interaction with him at the time, and I thought he was more reasonable, but he just seems to have gone down this whole woke world on the more violent the criminal, the quicker we got to put him back out on the streets. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to make regular citizens get punished for owning guns they want to, firearms they want to have to defend themselves. It's just absurd. So anyway, let's see. Oceana, I was there. You were a busy guy. I'm assuming you're referring to me at the Ocean Shores. And if so, I'm sorry that I was too busy. Hopefully you came up and you said something to me. And this is a correct point from Ocean Shores, your next comment. Nobody flinched during the power outage. No whining was present. And you're right. I really liked the adaptability. Hundreds of people there. The whole room was just about full, and quickly changing the seating to stadium seating, moving closer to the stage, speakers trying to speak up. And even when we had that little flash where the power came back on for a while and they were using the mics and the mics went out, speakers just adjusted and were projecting as best they could. So I thought that was pretty good. Let's see. I'm trying to get to questions here, guys, and there's a ton of stuff that you're posting up here. So I am going to keep jumping down to questions if I can find them. And again, where you see Jack does this, where he says, "At we the governed," it's actually over here, right there. That just makes it easier. It pops out on the screen for me to be able to catch your question and attempt to answer it. Jack saying that we need a disaster here so badly so that Daddy Trump can show up and slap our fearless leaders around. Maybe. I am going to say, and I know I've done a video on this recently, that I do believe that Governor Bob Ferguson, no fan of mine, trust me, and I think I showed that pretty clearly in one of my last videos, but I think he's trying to appear to be the adult in the room with a bunch of crazy, nutty children running around the state legislature. Now, I don't know if he's doing that so that he can coordinate with them and maybe veto or line item veto some of the bills that come up so he can portray himself as a statesman of some kind, because he doesn't ever come across statesman-like, and he was always hyper-partisan and weird when he was in the AG's office. He's putting on this facade of trying to be a normal human person again and pretending like he's an adult and not a crazy guy. So I don't know if that's the posturing that he's doing for some kind of political reasons, or if he's genuinely focused as well on just not being the nail that sticks up above the other crazy governors, holding back a little bit, letting Newsom, letting Pritzker, right, out of Illinois, or the governor out of Massachusetts, or somebody else take the initial hits from the Trump administration, and then he and Ferguson sitting back, just trying to see which way the wind blows so he can see how far he needs to go. Remember, he was funded by crazy leftists generally, and so there's still expectations that they have, but he also looking, he's not an idiot. He has looked at what's happened around the country. He has seen probably some of the same polls that insiders are also looking at right now that doesn't bode well for a lot of the aggressive leftist ideology that they've been pushing. And even though the Democrats appear to be chomping at the bit doing crazy things in Olympia, that doesn't seem to be a very smart approach to take, considering that it's going to make them look even worse, especially the denial of the difference between men and women, or even being able to identify what a woman is. I bet there's not a single state legislator or state senator today that has a D next to their name who actually can answer that question, which is stunning when you think about it. So that's not a normal thing. That doesn't make you look impressive. So we'll see where we go there. Matthew, yes, a recently unemployed hunter, uses that means to feed my family. Mandated gun insurance scares me the most. Yeah, and I also think that most people wouldn't comply with it, frankly. It's just one of those, dumb bill ideas that may not last long even if they did pass it, and I don't think they'd comply with it. I don't think I would. So my guess is most people wouldn't either. How do we get our employees to understand regulating arms is not a constitutional remunerated service? I don't. You're asking about your employees, so I don't know. I'm assuming you're trying to communicate to anybody, whether they're employees or not. But that's an odd way of framing it there. So I don't know if I can answer that exactly the way. I mean, a lot of it is I try to go back to first principles and just trying to argue the importance of the Second Amendment and Washington State, which actually, in theory, if the Constitution was enforced the way it's written, that even has stronger protections of our Second Amendment rights at the state level. But you have to spend time really just educating people on the importance of having the ability to defend yourself and the short-sightedness and the bizarre aspects of some of these other proposals. Let's see, John Connolly here. At the very least, everyone should vote, submit positions on bills using the Washington State Legislative website. And yeah, I know that's not a question, but I post it here anyway because Conservative Ladies of Washington's bill tracker emails are really good. There's better people tracking the legislation, I should say, from a wider perspective of freedom-oriented agenda focus today than there's ever been in the last 15 years. I've been paying attention to this, and probably ever. It's not that nobody's done that before. It's that they're just doing a much better job now widely disseminating this information, and your ability to comment today is the easiest it's ever been actually in human history. So there's really less excuse now than there was 2 years ago or any other time in history in not just taking a few minutes and going in and logging in and commenting. I've done a video on how to do that real quick and easy. You can get into more details on how to do it. It's actually pretty self-explanatory and fairly intuitive. The video I did is the simplest way of reaching out and getting it done. But it's just a really easy way to comment. And the Conservative Ladies of Washington have done a really great job. They got a good YouTube channel, just like Washington Gun Law. Those are the two YouTube channels. And I would say Brandy Cruz, I would throw her channel in there too. Those are three channels that everybody in Washington State should subscribe to, in addition to We the Govern. But you should subscribe to those just so that you can stay on top of what's going on. I really like a lot of the work that they're doing there. Let's see. What do you think of no property taxes? I'm trying to get to questions, guys, and there's a lot of them here, so I'm going to try to skip down through until I hit them. What do you think of no property taxes? Well, I love the idea of no property taxes. Some of you might have seen some of the articles and posts that are coming out of Texas, actually, where they actually have a worse property tax problem down there, it looks like, than we do in Washington. And they're developing a pretty aggressive pushback to overturn the entire property tax structure. If you look back in Washington State, actually, some of the original initiative tax fights that occurred in our state were about property taxes and reducing the millage, restricting the millage, creating greater voting requirements to approve taxes. A lot of things like that really did come out of Washington State early on. And there were a lot of taxes, Pushing back against taxes is nothing new in our state. They got rid of the poll tax. That was the first one that they didn't like. Property taxes have always been a sticking point. Sales tax, there have been fights over that over the years, but not as much. It's a little bit more limited direct impact. But property taxes, the way they're using them now, is a very abusive approach. And so if you can't keep it at a very minimal level, then it would be better to get rid of it. I will tell you, though, that's the dominant way that in our state they fund education. So you're going to have to come up with a structure that still supports whatever the basic requirements are. Yes, I know that our state is wasteful with probably the vast majority of money that you send to it. So downsizing our state government wouldn't be tough. It would actually be beneficial for most people. But you're still going to have to find a rational approach on how you're going to fund the parts of the state that are either constitutionally mandated or they fit within that area that most people say we want to have those things funded by the government. Firefighting capacity, usually it's building roads and bridges, things like that. Let's see. Jason, what's your thoughts on a bill to make insurance, on every gun you own or have millions of dollars on hand to pay the state? Doesn't make any sense. Poorly written, not sure how to enforce. Yeah, there's no way to enforce it. It's ridiculous. It's a dumb law, but they're really just doing it to try to scare people, to convince you to try to move if they can. They're terrified that the conservatives could win Washington State at some point, so they want to try to find ways of driving people out or depressing you and do stuff like that, or wasting your money, one of the others. Let's see. Shantona, I think this is the question that you meant to ask earlier, jumping down. I meant, what can we do? And remember, she's using this at We the Governed here, and that's easier for me to spot with all these questions coming up. I meant, what can we do about our voices being silenced now, thanks to the Democrats? And it's really not, what they've done recently in the legislature, they're silencing the legislators. They're silencing legislators and their ability to comment on bills from the floor. And so it's these procedural rules that are done behind the scenes. And nobody thought that the 132-year-old rule that has been on the books since just shortly after statehood and regulating and managing how the legislature conducts itself in Olympia, nobody thought that would disappear tomorrow. But one of the things to remember is, just like a convention, when you organize an event like that, they can oftentimes go rogue and they set their own rules. The convention set their own rules, which is one of the reasons why I did that long article on my website about my concerns about the Convention of States. But the same is true with the legislature. They're able to go in there and change the rules or adjust the rules any way they want, even though that was considered way outside the norms. And the last 6 generations of people in Washington State who have been in the legislature be rolling over in their graves, seeing this thing be removed. It's about silencing that, and really what it's trying to do is make it faster and easier for them in their last-minute panic when they go to push through a bunch of dumb bills. What has happened typically in the past is that we have lazy and exceptionally incompetent people in government most of the time. And we have our founding fathers in our state, in their infinite wisdom, decided to reduce the amount of time that our legislature spends in Olympia, which is a good thing. The less time they spend there, the less they can hurt you. So there's a short session and a long session. We're in the long session part of that cycle, because they're biennium cycles. There's two legislative, they basically are on 2-year cycles. So this year will be the longer cycle when they do the most number of bills. Next year will be the shorter cycle when they have fewer bills, typically. And when they do that, the main thing that they have to get out, the real fight that's going on that nobody talks about, is what's going on behind the scenes exclusively on the Democrat Party side, because of their majorities in both the House and the Senate, discussing budget issues as it relates to how they're going to divvy up the funds. And because the money is, according to them, going down right now, our state budget's dropped a little bit, and which is sort of inevitable. When you do stupid things, you will reduce the amount of money coming to the state. Part of it's also Boeing is suffering a lot right now. There's some other things that are happening that are probably affecting that. But the reality is the tax returns are just smaller. So it's smaller than what they had originally hoped. They've been living fat on the hog for 10 years with these escalating budgets where they get more money than they even anticipate. And so they've blown out the budget, which is typically how these guys run. And now the long knives are out behind the scenes as they duke it out in the background without you necessarily seeing it, but the lobbyists are there, special interests are there, and they want their piece of the pie, and probably a bigger piece of the pie. But now there's not enough money, so they have to basically undermine somebody else trying to cut in on their action. And so it's kind of like organized crime. The mob bosses, which is today's Democrat Party, they're going to be back there figuring out who gets what and who gets how much. And so that's kind of a tough battle for them to go through. So they're doing that behind the scenes, and that's their main goal. That's where all the action really is. Everything you see on the floor right now is a distraction from that fight. But because there's so much drama in it, and it's the only thing, literally the only thing that the legislature has to do in a given cycle, it would be a wonderful thing to see the legislature come together and only get a budget done in time. And they always wait till the last minute to propose their final budget. So because of that, all the distraction, the time they put into it, kind of what happens is they don't put the time into these other bills sometimes, and so they get a lot of dumb bills pushed back. They know they're unpopular. They're trying to support a constituency. Sometimes they don't really care if it gets through because that lets them collect more campaign cash from that leftist constituent or that special interest, because they can say, next cycle I'll fight even harder, give me money, I put my name on it, but because of whatever excuse they have, didn't come through. Now you can make me bring that through. Give me more money, that kind of thing. So sometimes they don't really want to come through just because of that. But they'll get a bunch of bills they have to drop in at the last minute, and they run out the clock. Now, they can always go and have a special session, but the governor has to decide to do that. My guess is Ferguson isn't actually in a mood to do that this cycle. So, and they know that, and a bunch of them don't really want to be in Olympia longer after the night after night, late night, and not that fulfilling sort of a set of things going on. Most legislators are worn out, and they do want to go home. So the Republicans will oftentimes get up and talk quite a bit about some of these bills that are particularly onerous or ridiculous. And so they'll spend their time talking about those bills on the floor. And what happens is, because math is not a strong suit for the Democrats, they oftentimes don't do a good job calculating how much time they have to get through whatever the last minute agenda is. So a lot of bills fall off that end. A lot of stupid, bad, terrible ideas and bad bills fall off the end. And it's a procedural maneuver to some extent, but it's not filibustering. The Republicans don't have an unlimited amount of time. They can just talk on the floor the way the federal Senate has back in D.C. And they've always had the ability that if they aren't making sense or it's ridiculous, that they've had a supermajority vote that for 132 years they could vote to say, listen, we're going to cut this debate off. Let's just go and call the vote. But instead what they want to do is have this minimal vote where just Democrats vote, say we don't want to hear from Republicans. That's essentially what this is. That's what's the problem. It's not cutting our voices off, but the people that we've elected, if you have to come from a conservative part of the state, and I do, I'm in the north part of the 20th Ledge District, so it would mean that my representatives and state senator couldn't actually express the concerns that they have about that legislation on the floor, and so they get cut off of being able to say anything, and it is an issue. Let's go. J. Thomas Glenn, could contractual law be used as a tool to push back on the legislatures that forcing unconstitutional laws against the people? Well, I don't know, but I mean, honestly, if I was going to file a lawsuit in Washington state, especially with the low quality and subpar abilities of most of our state judges, I would probably go federal. So I would look at it as federal mainly. Let's see. Everybody's talking about this. Yes, Matt Marshall did get elected in the 2nd legislative district, which is Thurston County and Pierce. And I think he's going to be a really good legislature his first session in. Mark Williams, how can you run for office? I've contacted the Republican Party by email, calling them, never getting a response. Well, Mark, you don't need the Republican Party to run for office, but I would do some of your own homework. I put on training sessions all the time about running for office. And if you don't know enough that you have to call a party to ask them, you really are behind the 8 ball. So I would start doing some homework where you live. The way it works, if you want to run for office, please, dear God, don't just jump in and run for Congress. That's just a foolish path for failure if you're really not ready or prepared for that kind of a campaign. And you probably aren't if you're trying to reach out to the party for advice. What I would do is look at your local government where you live, look at your school board, city council, county commission, or one of those positions like that, port commission, pars commission, something like that. Get your feet wet jumping into a local government office. If you can't win that race, you aren't going to win any of the other races that you believe that you can run for, most likely. It's a good experience to go through that process because it gives you a reality check on the process of what's involved in actually running a political campaign. And there's a lot more involved than what you think there is. It's not the 2-hour Sunday afternoon special that you see on TV or television, the way they Hollywood turns the campaigns, what they look like on TV. It's not like that at all. Although I have to tell you, the vast majority of people I see jump into running for political office, I think they think that. So it's very different. And it's not about... it's about coming up with a plan, and there's basic things you want to be able to answer if you're going to run for office. Number one, if you're married, you better make sure your spouse is on board. If your spouse says absolutely not, no way, and they're going to undermine you, do yourself and your volunteers a favor and don't get involved because you will fail. And there's really no way to overcome the division that you would have at home if you're trying to run for office. Because once you decide to run for office, you really have to kind of take it seriously. You can't do it in a half-hearted way. And I know a lot of Republican candidates do run for office in a weak, half-hearted way, but it's not the path to success. And it doesn't mean that you can't accidentally win sometimes, but it's not the likely path to success. You have to recognize that during the election cycle that you're going to be running from February all the way through, till November. There's no date nights. You're missing all your kids' events. You aren't going to be able to mow the lawn or fix the car or repair the roof. All of that stuff goes out the window. Your sole job is running for office full time. And that's hard for most people to do. You might have a job and you have to do that, and then you shift into what you need to do. But mostly it's about spending the time to work the community to get elected. And it's not as simple as anybody thinks. Even for a school board race, it isn't. So it takes a lot of work and planning. And you need to educate yourself about the position you're running for. How many people vote in it? What's the difference in voting over the last few years? All this stuff's public. How much have campaigns cost historically to run for that race? What's the size of the budget of the office I'm running for in the city, the county, the port commission, or the school district? If it's a school district, how many students go there on average? How many employees are work there? What is their budget? How has their budget changed over the last few years? Have you ever gone to a meeting of that elected body and learned something about what they actually do? I am stunned and amazed at the number of people who jump in and run for office, and they literally have no idea. They don't even know they don't even know what they're running for. That is not the path to success. By the time you figure it out, the campaign's over and you've lost. So doing your homework ahead of time is a very wise and prudent approach to running for political office. Dear Lord, if people just did this more, we would actually win a lot more races. But for some reason, on our side, our liberty, freedom oriented side, we tend not to look at this. So that's just something. So the call to the party it should be down the road after you've already done all your homework and you're really just trying to coordinate with them so they know that you're going to be on the conservative side of the spectrum. The party doesn't have money. They don't have volunteers. They don't have campaign services. They don't have anything else to give you. And if you're relying on them to help you get across the finish line, then you're not ready to run either, because it means you haven't done any homework on the interaction you're going to have. The party can help some in limited cases in some places, but most of the time they're not going to be able to provide the kind of value you think they should. And then that just makes you bitter because you presume they're going to give you all the support when that's not true. So anyway, that's my approach on running for office. I do a lot of candidate training, and I've helped train a few hundred people to run for office successfully, but I've trained a lot of people over the years, and I encourage them to start somewhere that they have some control over and they can make a difference where they live. And there's a lot more to it than that, but it's pretty simple. Let's see. I'm trying to find the questions I saw down here earlier. Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry, guys. There's a lot of questions here, and I'm trying to get to you. You've put a lot of them in, so I'm trying to move down to the questions. This is a question, but it's actually in response to somebody saying end mail-in voting. The best way to do that here initially is the federal movement that appears to be motivated by the Trump administration right now to do it federally across the board. It wouldn't just affect Washington, it would affect Washington, Oregon, Colorado, California, and Arizona probably more than anybody else. So that's actually how I would see mail-in voting, the most realistic way that it would end. Michael Case, any thoughts on how we can rid ourselves of those omni ballots? And yes, I do. We have more issues about the omni ballots. There's a lawsuit going on about what's going on. Omni ballot is this outside third-party vendor that mainly King County, but appears that Pierce, Spokane, and others used this entity, and it's really questionable. I mean, I think it's pretty illegal, really, that they were using them to do online signature validation for ballots that were rejected for signatures not matching or for not having a signature at all. And so they were using this third-party vendor issue, and conveniently, anybody that used them was always majority. 98% of them were Democrats, of course, and so it was a kind of a corrupt program that the elected officials had outsourced to this entity, and there's a litigation on it right now, and we're trying to expose a bunch of stuff as it relates to that. It's a legal removal that you have to go through, and that's what's going on right now. Farm Truck 01, will the Trump administration have any effect at all in our states, I'm assuming? Our state, as far as property rights or gun rights are concerned? Or will our state leaders just ignore it all? Well, our state leaders, being defined as some of the elected officials, may ignore it a bit. But I don't know that they can going forward. And I'll tell you what makes me think this more is looking at what Trump did in California, going down there for the fires, which, again, that's what's motivated, the emergency, the chaos, burning your city up. Even in California, they'll notice when you burn down 15,000 buildings in the middle of a rich area of California in L.A., and Trump appears to be aware of some of the property rights issues, mainly related to water and forest management practices and permitting, which he seems to be jumping in whole 2 feet and jumping right into it. And then also voting issues as it relates to showing voter ID. I think if you change the voter issues, you affect a lot of the other things, including gun rights. The gun rights and property rights issues as a direct frontal assault fix in Washington are probably more federal issues related to litigation because of the infringement on property rights and or Second Amendment rights. And I think you have the ability to push back on that. But you do need ultimately to fix a lot of the it would be helpful if we elected better people in Washington. And there is some, we get into this confusion sometimes. You do have to run good people for office, people who don't need a drool cup to function in public. That's a good place to start. It'd be nice if they actually know what they're talking about and if they've actually run a campaign before and if they know how to fundraise. And they don't lose votes doorbelling, but they actually have the ability, because of the personality, that they would pick up doorbells or actually make people want to vote for them and not lose people when they go out and talk to them in public. Takes a lot of work. It's not for everybody. And if you find the right people, they can win, and they can win in many of the places. They're not going to win in downtown Seattle, but they're going to win in some of these other places, especially some of these districts. But you got to have a real productive plan that makes sense, and you're willing to work for it. If you're not willing to work for it, then losing is just all you're going to find for the most part. Lanny, could we get to the issues faster? Organized and important, but more listen if the issues are dealt with clearly and directly. Sure, let's get to some questions. And I do get off on some of these other topics. Let's see. Brian, yeah, that's funny. So Brian, sorry, just joined. Armin and I are wondering if, this is Brian Smith, if we could just sue the Dems on grounds of insanity. No, you probably can't. Nice thought. They are probably insane, but I don't think that you can do that. Dave Walker, 0967, what can be done about our Second Amendment rights being slammed? Just keep pushing back right now. And I mean, get in there and still put a lot of comments in, push back on it. That's worth spending the time on. Secondly, I would really work on political campaigns. And thirdly, I would look at, in the off chance that you have the right set of circumstances, potentially finding some litigation you could work on. One of the things that, and I don't know yet because they haven't appointed, but once Pam Bondi's in there, there's some real opportunities with who gets put into the U.S. Attorney's Office out here in Washington State. But until I know who that is, and until I see it happen, it's a theory right now on which areas in Washington State could be investigated for public integrity and corruption issues. So we'll just see how it goes. So now that we have Team Trump in office, how is the idea of secession looking to you? And I'm assuming you mean who comes after Trump. I don't know. I mean, obviously, J.D. Vance is being positioned in that place, but frankly, there'll be a number of people who'd probably be able to do the job. You're never going to be able to do the job like Trump. Trump is a once-in-a-lifetime type of person who has the ability to do things that people who try to imitate him are just going to fail. So you have different people coming in, but they can push on the same agenda. And I don't know what that looks like, but obviously that's something I'd be putting some time into it. I work towards trying to plan who would be next. I mean, I'd be working in Washington right now on understanding who's actually going to run in some of these swing legislative districts, the 10th and the 24th and the 47th and the 42nd. I mean, these are districts I'd be spending some time recruiting and cultivating and planning successful campaigns, or campaigns that have the ability to succeed. And at least you give them the best chance they have to succeed in some of these districts. Let's see, Tom IV, appreciate all your content, well presented, very informative, not too all is lost, which I find some other forums presenters to have. Side note, is that a tiny bottle? Yeah, that's funny. Okay, or do I have giant hands? I have huge hands because I'm always out working in the woods and running the chainsaw and doing all that work. And the more you work outdoors, I think you're always going to have, you need to have bigger hands when you're working in that type of environment. However, what I would do is, I don't quite get the people who are doomer and gloomers as a perpetual state of existence. And I don't quite get that. I don't think that's an effective strategy, and it's an irrational strategy on its own. I think you have to have a balance. I think on one hand, you want to always be prepared for the worst case scenarios. It's no different than any preparation. The term prepper is relatively new. That came out in about 2007-ish or so in the lexicon that we have now. It used to be that people would just be prepared. Being prepared, always be prepared is a great Boy Scout motto. I would agree with that now. Be prepared for bad things. Be aware of them, have a plan. There's a reason why you have a concealed carry weapon. There's a reason why you have insurance. There's a reason why you might stockpile food or be prepared for a bad storm. But that doesn't mean that, if you live in that space all the time where you want disaster to live in your head for the rest of your life. Some people like living that way, and you can, but typically, success comes when you're least expecting it, and it's only going to come the more people push and confront it. The people that I see today that are always doom and glooming are all is lost, people that always are that way. They're the ones who did nothing to help during the Revolutionary War when George Washington needed help, right? Because all was lost. They're the ones that throughout history have always been the people that never really contributed to anything because they were always focused on losing and obsessing about losing. Sometimes, now at the same time, you can't be irrational in how you approach things. You want to have a balance that you put together a plan that's somewhat realistic to try to get there. Let's see, Mark Williams, you had a question. This is probably following up from what I said earlier, but who can we contact to get involved and run for elected office? Well, it starts with you. So if you don't know anybody and you have no friends and you have no way to raise money and you can't put together a friend list of 200 people that can give you some money and help and support, it starts with you. That means you're probably not the right person to run, most likely. People who have community connections, have been involved in the community, are more likely to get out there and win. If you're just trying to come out of left field and run for office, please don't do that. Now, one of the things I would do is go in and volunteer for somebody who is running, and that's one way to build up that network and help. Let's see. Let's see. Ferguson for class president at Western State. I would not give him that level of advancement, but I do appreciate where you're coming from there. Let's see. Ranked choice voting. Oh, right. Somebody would put it in the ranked choice. Yeah, that's a terrible idea. Another bad idea. Brian Smith, another great resource for tracking what's happening in Washington State. Washington Prayer in Action. I agree, but there's a lot of these groups that are doing some really good work. Conservative Ladies in Washington, Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, Washington Prayer in Action. There's just a number of groups that are doing. They're just doing a better job than anyone else has actually in a long time. Lanny, I'm new to your site. Is anyone in Washington interested in pro-life and the one chance to reverse Roe v. Wade in over 50 years? Well, in case you don't realize it, it's actually been reversed already. That happened a while ago. There's always been people who are pro-life in Washington State for a long, long time. I mean, it's been a movement here since before you were born, most likely. But when you say it's just such an open-ended question, I would start with Family Policy Institute of Washington and some of the other groups that are actively involved. And if that's the policy focus that you're going to have there, you go there. That's not been my primary policy goal because I have a lot of other things I'm trying to work on before I get there. I am pro-life, but I mean, there's so many other things I'm working on. Second Amendment was really the issue that drove me into politics originally when I was in my teenage years and probably helped set my perspective on liberty and freedom moving forward. But as you get involved in more things, you kind of broaden your spectrum of things that you tend to focus on. Let's see. What do you make? This is Jason again. Okay, here's funny. Okay, I'm going to drop into this one first. Blue Jay, you asked a question here. Inslee Bill in the House in Idaho wants to run for governor there. Your thoughts? Not true. He doesn't want to run for governor in Idaho. He claims he doesn't even have property over there, and he also claims he's not moving. Most of that came out of an original story that I couldn't ever really source properly from Washington State. I was laughing when Inslee was forced to respond to this story, however, and that was funny. So, but that's what he says. Let's see. Somebody here mentioning, thank you, Glenn, for your very realistic view on what it means and how much planning, work, and money it takes to successfully run for office. I've only helped a couple hundred people do this, and I've seen a lot over the years. So you don't have to believe me. You can go make the same mistakes everybody else makes, or you can find ways to mitigate the difficulties and challenges and set yourself up for better success. And that's really what it comes down to. But it does help if you talk to people that have already been through it a little bit, and they can help you be just a little bit more likely to succeed. Let's see. Deb ZJ. What is the chance that they can actually override the 1% max property tax annual cap? That is probably, of all the taxes, the one that has the highest chance, I think, of maybe getting to the legislature, mainly because that's been the way it was for, I don't know, half a century, before it got changed about 15 years ago. 15 years ago now, I think, maybe 18 years ago. So that one of all of them, it doesn't require a lot of big changes in the system to implement it. So that is the one tax increase proposal that the way I look at it, looks like something that's going to take a little bit more work to try to defeat it. Let's see. Somebody here mentioning about, big Chevy Bowski Mike. Let's make my birth state and home of 45 years great again. I'm a prepper. It's called Basic Independence Life Skills that result in a stable, self-sustaining lifestyle. And I hear you, brother. Just don't spend all your time focused on the end of the world. Be prepared for yourself, your family, and your community, and then help others be a little bit more productive out there so that we can make that day a little bit less destructive if it ever comes, and maybe hold it off if we can get some better local governance along the way. And again, I don't find these questions super helpful because I have to look up the exact bill numbers, but 2177, 2178, I'm not sure which ones you're talking about there. Describe what they are so that I can understand the bills. I just don't have them all memorized. And if you've done this year after year after year, you're going to find that there are bills with the exact same number that you see today that have been in the past recycled for the last half century. And so what happens is they recycle these same bill numbers over and over again. So you're going to remember some big fight you had on that bill number. It's familiar to you, but it actually is from a fight 8 years ago or 12 years ago. Just kind of the way thing it is. So describe what it is. Sometimes a little bit of a title, then we can see it. Richard Lupfer, how do we limit individuals like Barry making decisions for all of us? A small set of individuals voted for her, and yet she's setting policy for the entire state. Listen, this is what happens when you elect people that, this is what happens when you elect people in government. Bad, dumb, corrupt people do bad, dumb, corrupt things. And the rare, honest one can do something really good if they're capable at the same time. That's helpful. So anyway, that's just, there's a lot of work that it takes to do all this. Here is a last question, I think, that I'm going to have here. And I think you had the first question at the beginning of this live stream here, which is, how does a state party bring unity in the party with the two factions of the mainstream Republicans and the America First Republicans? And, this isn't actually as hard as people think, but everybody wants to be the gatekeeper, and that's understandable. It's kind of a standard human dynamic where people want to be the gatekeeper. I want to be able to tell you that you're a mainstreamer rhino, whether or not you think you are, and you want to be able to tell me that I'm a mainstreamer rhino because in some bizarre corner of the universe where you live, you think that I'm not conservative enough. And so that becomes a faction fight for no productive reason, just because usually it's a personality clash. Somebody supported a candidate that I didn't like, or I support a candidate that you didn't like, and so that bitterness carries on for the next two decades of your life in politics. And oftentimes the origin of a lot of these faction fights are really nothing more than that. It's just the personality profiles of people who get involved in politics. I've been around a long time. I mean, this is no different than when I was in college. Republicans, the same thing. So I think being concerned about somehow getting a universal, pure set of people in the room, whether they call themselves Republicans or something else, and then imagining that there's some kind of utopia on earth where all of them are going to agree on everything and work together in perfect lockstep. Well, I have to explain something to you. That is a scenario that has never existed in human history and never will. And so you're aspiring for an equally unrealistic utopia that the Democrat, leftists, Marxists are aspiring for in their completely unrealistic view of the nature of man. In fact, you kind of have an unrealistic view of the nature of man if you think that's going to happen. Don't worry so much about everybody being on the same page. It is helpful if people are at least able to work together productively. I agree on that. I end up seeing these faction fights, and I've seen the same thing recycled over and over and over again, mostly. And sometimes it's new people coming in, they don't know better, and they just say, I'm going to purify the party. And I've been through that. I had my own cycle of that back when I was in my 20s. Where I wanted to do that too. But I think the more you get to know people, it's really more about how to very clearly communicate and understand that if you're bothering to say that you're a Republican or you're going to be in the conservative spectrum of liberty and freedom, that you're going to agree on a large percentage of what you're fighting for. I know you had the 80-20 rule that Reagan used to use, and it gets rehashed a lot. But essentially, there's some truth to this, and Trump does this better than most modern politicians do, where he'll take people who actually attacked him before and probably disagree with him on key things, and yet he'll bring them into his administration if he believes that they're a fighter and a warrior on a path that he wants to go down. So that is a really significant step towards unifying and organizing and leading a group of people to attain and achieve a goal that you're wanting to attain. The one thing to remember in the party process, there are people who basically they have the psychological profile where they like being losers forever. They enjoy it. It's just losing is really part of who their personality is. And so part of ensuring that you're always losing is always having a fight with your friends and or people who are your allies. Oftentimes it's based on a total fear and not even awareness of what you're fighting on the left, where you really have to fight, especially in a state like ours. And because you're unfamiliar with them, you haven't done homework on them, you don't know who they are, it's just easier to fight with the people that you see all the time at a central committee meeting, because that's just psychologically an easier thing that you can do. And it's like watching people have family feuds, it's the same kind of thing. And so you'll just waste, and basically your life energy is going to be spent achieving nothing of significance on this planet, fighting with other people inside your own party and going nowhere because you're never trying to advance the overall cause out into the community. And that's always something that people suffer from. That's what makes the utopia of having everybody being together a problem that you'll never attain. Now, what you can do is you can have a path forward where you say, okay, I'd prefer this type of person leads the party, but there's always a path for those with whom you disagree. And if you find paths and avenues that you can channel people's capability or skill sets within a party structure to a wider degree, you're going to have less bitter critters there and more functional path where you're actually putting on events that matter, that people care about. I have this whole thing where I've done some training classes, and oddly enough, I found this from going undercover to Democrat meeting one time, recording it, but about how to put on a meeting that's not boring and how to grow your group. And there's a way to do that. And if you're actually interested in that, which I found most people who fight over these things aren't, but if you are, then I'm happy to put on that kind of a training for you where you live. There's a Jason, you're asking me if there's anything interesting out of Seattle, outside or outside of Seattle that you're working on. I'm always working on a bunch of stuff around. I have a story coming out about a judge out of Bremerton. I recorded the video today. I think it's a great video. Total corrupt judge, got exposed, really worthwhile. I appreciate everybody taking a look at it. It'll probably launch today or tomorrow. So that's about it, guys, because I am running out of time and I have got to do some more Zoom training with some activists here tonight. But thank you guys so much for logging on. I saw there were a lot of people here who did. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to put those in the comment section down below. However many people watched it tonight, and it looks like there were over 1,000 total, although not that many at any one time. I do encourage you, if you're logging in later, more people tend to watch these live streams after the fact than they actually watch them live. And you still have comments or questions, feel free to put those down below. I will do my best to answer them. No guarantees you're going to like the answer. We got a lot going on. I mentioned earlier a lot of these events. If you're going to be at the Douglas Chelan Women's Republican Club on Monday the 3rd, or if you're going to be out in Skagit County on Tuesday the 4th next week, happy to see you there. Come on up to me. Let me know you saw this live stream if you are there. Otherwise, I will do my next live stream next week on Wednesday at 5:30. I hope that works for you. There's a lot going on. Like I said, every week a decade seems to be happening here with the Trump administration. So it's kind of a shock and awe thing going on in D.C., and hopefully some of that impact is going to start restoring some liberty and freedom back here in Washington. But we got a lot of fights going on, and fighting in Olympia is a good place to start right now. And if you can save some of your energy to actually fight the Democrats and the leftists rather than each other, then I think we'd all be better off for it. With that, guys, thank you so much. I didn't do a super great job with this live stream tonight, but and I'll get a little bit better handle on it next week. But I hope all's well, and enjoy the day, and always be prepared. And we'll see you next time.